I'm really glad to announce him here. First of all, my colleague Kylie Figueroa will interview him and talk to him. He's a writer, producer, and part of Yanni's Productions, and from London came here. He hosted yesterday, and I'm glad to have you here. And he's going to talk with Aaron Thomas, the creator, the co-creator of S.W.A.T and screenwriter. And I think this is going to be a masterclass as well. So enjoy and welcome both with a loud applause.
Thank you again. As the host mentioned, thank you again. I am here with Aaron Rahsaan Thomas, and we are here to talk about screenwriting, his process, the secrets to his success, and I guess what it looks like in that process for creating content for BET Studios, for CBS with S.W.A.T, and as I recall, NCI.
CSI.
CSI, apologies, yes, of course, CSI. So just creating compelling content and story writing in general. I wonder if you can speak to your process in general, as well as some tips and secrets which you use.
Well, I'll walk you through my process a little bit for a little bit of context. So I'm from the United States, from Los Angeles. But I have family in Ghana, and I love to try to tell stories internationally whenever possible. My process is such that in growing up and listening to some of the speakers before was very helpful. I was fortunate to have an encouragement from family and friends to be able to pursue the arts, to have the opportunity to study the structure of writing and writing for different formats. And so I attended the USC, University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts in Los Angeles. This is the school that produced John Singleton and Ryan Coogler and George Lucas and many others. But it was at that school that I picked up the many different ways you can write for the screen. Of course, there's several different ways to write, period. You can write books, and you can write plays, and you write poetry, and you can write greeting cards, and and all different types of ways to write. But in film school, what I picked up on was specifically how there are different techniques to use for writing for the screen, specifically. So writing for film, for cinema, and writing for what I call long-form storytelling, which is formerly known as television, but now you watch it on your phone, you can watch it on your tablet. So it's long-form storytelling.
Sure.
And the major difference, I would say, is just in time length a lot of times, right? So you have some stories that are perfect for a short film, 5-minute film, 10-minute film, 15-minute film. You have some stories that are perfect for a 2-hour film or a 3-hour film. And then some stories, I think, demand even more time. For a show that I created, S.W.A.T, we actually, the final episode just aired last night.
Oh, wow, well done.
But that was over 150 hours of storytelling, and that was a story that we were fortunate enough to have time to tell. So it all comes down to a lot of times determining first what type of story it is, and how much time you might need to really do the story justice.
Absolutely. Now, do you find that in terms of your process that you tend to be more of a what is it called, a gardener to sort of writer, where you put seeds in places and then wait for them to be cultivated, or is it more of like an architect where you know the frame, you know the foundation, and you have an idea of how it will build out, you try to stick to that frame?
It's a good question. So there's the writing process, the creative process of creating content, right? And then there's also the business side.
Sure.
And I find that the writer's duties and the writer's position and the writer's worth is different depending on the business format. So in features, I think writers are often known as the person who comes up with the idea, you write the script, but then it becomes a director's medium, where the script is, the director takes it, and the director's vision is the vision that tends to drive the narrative.
Sure.
I compare it to having a child, and then you allow your child to be adopted. And
oh, wow. Yeah, for sure, for sure.
And as a writer, you will see your child again when they turn 18, and you hope that you recognize them, but maybe you won't. So
Sure.
That's the process in features a lot of times, unless it's a writer-director, and then you are raising the child as
Sure.
well. In TV, it's a little different because of the long-form process where you're able to raise a child and able to not only come up with the idea, but also be able to produce, at least in the States, you're able to produce and guide the vision
Sure.
and establish the vision. So to answer your question, there are managerial elements when you're guiding a vision, right? It's not just the creation of the content, but it's also determining what team is best to help execute the plan. Who are the best directors? Who's the best cast? Who are the best costume designers? Who are the best visual effects, if you need it? Who are the best composers? Who are the best editors? And so that requires some level of gardening,
Sure.
so to speak, sowing seeds. But it also requires I think a considered amount of being able to facilitate, being able to recognize how people best do their job, and hopefully putting them in positions where they can do their job in the best way. Oftentimes when people ask me about the job that I've had as a creator, showrunner, what they hear, what they assume is that means you get to tell everybody what to do. But that's not, I don't find that that's the most effective way to do that job. The most effective way is to surround yourself with people who are talented and oftentimes smarter than you, and then recognize where they can best be utilized and be able to flourish and do the best job that they can, because that only helps the project.
So it sort of comes down to delegation skills as well.
Delegation skills, talent recognition,
Sure.
and hopefully being self-aware that you cannot and probably should not try to do everything yourself.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I can say, I'm not sure if you heard at all yesterday on the panel, but that's sort of what I realized why I had to dig deep and really dive into filmmaking, because my background was sort of like very, scrappy. I sort of bought my own equipment. I got big into vintage lenses, and then I got way too deep into cinematography for like a year. I had a collection of like 36 vintage lenses from Japan and Russia, and I packed up my car and I drove it from Boston to Los Angeles with a plan of doing everything on my own. And then I got there and I was like, this takes a whole damn village, and I can't do this by myself.
But I will say this: I do think it's good to be educated in how everything works.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know, to have a sense of how lenses work, which lenses to use, and then you want to find someone who knows what they're doing with lenses.
Exactly. Knows how to work what they're doing. Yeah,
Right.
Exactly.
But it's good to be aware, because I believe that you're a better manager if you are curious, consistently curious, and always learning about the different things, different ways. And even when you think that you know a lot, technology changes, and all of a sudden there are new things to learn.
Sure. So about staying abreast of these different changes.
Correct.
And such. So I have two quick questions about your particular writing. First and foremost, you touched on it in terms of like being prepared, finding the right people, to the right avenue, I guess, for your content. What about content that you have a passion to write, but you know you couldn't find the funding yet? Are there any projects that you're like, it's just too big? You know, I have a sci-fi concept, it'll be at least 10 million per episode, so I'm not even going to try to pitch it to someone.
I don't believe anything's ever impossible. I'm very spiritual. I was raised my parents as a Christian, so I believe everything is possible through God. But for those who are not even spiritual, I also feel oftentimes these things are a matter of timing. So there are projects now that are being produced that would not have been possible 20 years ago.
Sure.
You know, many of the Marvel films, the Lord of the Rings, things like that, 30 years ago, they would not have been possible because there weren't the means or the appetite, perhaps, to do these things. But sooner or later, there tends to be a time or an opportunity to tell almost any type of story, I feel. I would never give up on any idea. I think it's a matter of being ready when the timing is right. So even if something seems like it would be very expensive right now, maybe it would. You never know how things can shift, where there may be an appetite for expensive things, or it may not be as expensive as you would think.
As you would expect, yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
and, you know, in time. So it's collecting, projects and potential projects, and then it's also being very aware of how the sands are shifting, and what the appetite is and what the feasibility is.
Sure, which speaks to staying abreast of the new changes and just doing your research effectively, eh?
Yeah, I think so. But I think also for the creative spirit, it helps to to be optimistic and also to have a...
So that's my problem. All right.
No. But I was going to say, a healthy dose of delusion is very, very helpful.
For sure,
Yes.
for sure.
To,
Okay, yeah.
You know, it's never dead.
For sure, I appreciate that, yeah. So speaking to a sort of a more grand take on writing itself, are there any sort of like daily things that you engage in? I know that myself, someone spoke about 5 pages a day, and for me, what I do was actually a tip from someone I met when I was a finalist at London Independent Film Festival, and he said to put a post-it note in every room of the house saying, write the damn thing. So you just are surrounded by the constant looming demon that is finally getting to the page.
I'm going to say something I think is a little controversial because you're told that you're supposed to write every day, right? And I think what most people mean when they say that is you're supposed to type every day. But I consider writing to be a lot of different things. Oftentimes I do most of my writing before I sit down to type. I do writing as I walk over here and I'm brainstorming ideas. I'm writing when I'm listening to people have a conversation in a cafe where I'm listening to how they talk and what words they use and what tone that a mother uses with her daughter, you know, or that a brother uses with his, his estranged big brother. These are things, I consider all of that writing. I consider writing to be when you tell someone how your day went.
Okay.
That to me is, so I consider everyone to be a storyteller on some level. I think what is helpful every day is to be open to the ideas that are around you, because I think you're surrounded by a billion different stories everywhere you go.
Absolutely.
And so it's being attuned to those ideas, life that is going around, and then when something occurs, you making sure that you definitely take note. Record it. There are ideas that I place on my phone or in a notepad that I may not use in a script for another year, 2 years. But if I find that it's interesting, a moment, like I said, or a situation or a premise that I don't yet have a story for, but it sounds interesting, I'll collect those. And by the time I sit down to actually type, oftentimes 80% of my writing is done. I have an idea of what type of story I want to tell. But that's because I try not to turn my brain off. I try to leave it open.
Nice.
So that's what I would do every day.
No, I really appreciate that, of course. And you're talking also about like drawing inspiration and just letting the cogs turn. Allowing yourself to just pace it out. As you're living.
I think the keyboard can be a monster to many. Yeah. So oftentimes the thought of having to just type, for many feels daunting. And sometimes it helps if you're having writer's block, just sit down and just write whatever comes to mind, right? Just to get through it. Yeah. I do think there is something to be said. There's an experienced writer who I worked with before, and I thought she gave really, really good advice, but it's the old saying of don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So there's a lot of value in what I call what many call the vomit draft.
Of course.
Being able to just sit down, just write, understand this is probably going to be the worst version of whatever it is. And then oftentimes if you do that and you can just get past that point and there's actually words on the page, what you want to do is as fast as possible, I think, get to the process of rewriting. That's the thing that writers tend to really enjoy. It's not even so much writing, it's the rewriting, being able to fix it, go in, make it good. And oftentimes if you can get past the point of the vomit draft, when you look back at it, it's oftentimes not quite as bad. It may not be as bad as you think.
I mean, I've had some very bad vomit drafts. I found an old script, the first script I ever wrote, which I'd love to speak about in terms of your first steps in writing. I found the first stabs at a feature not too long ago. I started writing in 2008, before I had ever been to university, and there was a scene that I wrote in where the university saw college students were like going to their lockers, and I was like, oh, that's not really a thing. I just had no idea, so probably those aspects need to be just cut.
Yeah, there are details, there are things, logic, and all types of, but if the heart of it is there, if there's a point to that scene, let's say, and you really want to have a gathering spot for your students, that might actually still work. It's just the details have to be changed.
There we are, absolutely. I have to take another stab at that then, yes. So may I ask then, you spoke on this briefly in the beginning where you talked about the adoption analogy, which I loved, by the way. I often hear it saying, hear people say that your first feature is your baby, and it's very difficult for some people to give up their baby, as you mentioned, for the sake of getting it finished. May I ask, was the first thing that you finished the first thing that you produced or got made, or are there many previous drafts that have been previously written you're waiting to really put out there?
So this is where I should say no, because I think for most writers it is no. I was fortunate in that there was a script that I had written, one of the easier scripts that I'd ever written because it just came to me. It was an action movie that I had written. I'd been inspired by some of the spaghetti westerns of old with Sergio Leone and Ennio Morricone and the young Clint Eastwood, and I wanted to update this for like a modern audience. So I written a script when I was early in film school about, instead of two cowboys or two assassins, and they were rival assassins, and instead of Lee Van Cleef and Clint Eastwood, I did like two black assassins, one older, one younger. And at the time I had all these visions about like, we'll get Morgan Freeman and maybe Wesley Snipes, you know. And, but I was fortunate in that I was able to write that. I had a lot of fun writing it. It just kind of poured out of me. I wrote that in about 48 hours. It just, you know, and I think because there was kind of a really clear vision is why it made it probably the easiest thing I ever wrote. But I also was able to get recognition off of that, where at the time off of that script, I was able to meet with a lot of big action, you know, people. Action directors, Michael Bay and Ridley Scott and a bunch of other people. Wow. But here's the thing. So the writing part was relatively easier than expected, and I enjoyed it. But the development part, as far as getting it from script to screen, that took years. Sure. So, you know, I had written it, you know, in 48 hours, but it was another good 8-9 years before that script became a film. And we eventually ended up finding a home and making it with Jean-Claude Van Damme. So I didn't quite get my black actors. Well, I mean. But we made that in Romania and for a low budget, and, you know, I was happy that it was produced. But that was the first real screenplay that I'd ever written. I'd taken a stab at other things before that. Personal stories. I think many writers, you start off with, you know, what's the story of my life? You know, as they say. Yeah. Sure. So there's like a few of those, but like the first real attempt was that script. Now that said, that doesn't mean that everything after that was nearly as easy. Sure. But for that one, it was kind of a charmed process, and that I was, you know, very fortunate to go through. For sure. And obviously there's many struggles in the process of screenwriting. So I want to focus more on the ups before we get into the downs of it all. But in terms of producing, in terms of writing, your background was a screenwriter in university, is that correct? Yes. Coming into university, you learn everything. So you learn a little bit of everything. And another thing one of the things that I think is interesting about university is because you're able to sample different things, appetizers, if you will. Sure. You can determine which things you like the most. Or what are you going back for? To use the food analogy further, what are you going back for a second dish of? Sure. So coming into university, I came up in the generation that kind of studied a lot of the writer-directors, you know. So you had Halle Garima, you had Spike Lee, you had John Singleton, you had, you know, Soderbergh and Paul Thomas Anderson, all of these filmmakers, right? But what happened in my generation is while I was there, we started to discover this change in long-form storytelling, where before, growing up, I think TV was kind of seen as this thing that you watch that will rot your brain. Sure. It's not good. It's bad for you. Children should not watch too much of it. There's no nutritional value. But then in my generation, what we started to see was a shift where some of the films that were getting made before, those middle budgeted films were kind of getting thinned out. We're starting to see it being have and have-nots, larger films and smaller films. That middle section started to go into TV, you know, some of the artists. And so you started to see prestige TV rise. We started to see shows like The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, and The Wire. And all of a sudden, there was kind of a respect for TV that had not been completely there before. And so to answer your question, my focus shifted. I did not start off wanting to be a TV writer. I came in looking at these writer-directors and going, that was the way to go. And then what I discovered with TV through different access points that I had to writers' rooms was that if you love storytelling and you love doing it a lot, it to me is the greatest way to do it because you get to do it so much. I don't just tell one story and I'm done. You know, a 2-hour, film. I get to do this for 40, 60 hours, 70, 150 hours. And I love that process of coming up with ideas and being able to brainstorm characters. And
Sure.
So that was perfect.
For sure. Do you then feel like you excel more in the writer's room, in more of the group setting, with someone to bounce ideas off of, or do you sort of come more with a plan and hope people can facilitate your plan?
I think, first of all, I think there's many ways to be successful with the storytelling process, whether it's collaborative with the team or, on your own. I've had to do both, and they have their strengths and their pros and their cons, right? So working with the team was great is that oftentimes you'll be exposed to ideas that you perhaps never considered. You have people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, different views, and you can get really, really interesting things that you may not carry, but others may carry.
Sure, the stories we tell, of course. Yeah.
Right. On the other hand, it is nice at times to be able to just say, hey, I like this, and I don't have to debate with anybody, and this is what, I'm going to do. I think it depends on the project.
Sure.
What does the project require? If the story is one where we need multiple perspectives, let's say I'm telling a story about a family, and I'm telling a story about the mother, the father, the teenage son, the preteen daughter, and a baby. Being self-aware, it may help me to make sure that I have some of the points of view that I don't naturally have. I may want to make sure that I have a mother, someone who has been a mother or is a mother in a room. I try not to be arrogant enough to feel like I know everybody. I know everything about everyone. I want to make sure that if I want to make sure the project is as good as possible, I want to try to maximize, the things. If I'm telling a story that's maybe about my life or something that's exclusive to me, I may not need, others. Certainly to be able to get opinions on how the story is unfolding and if it's clear and if it's good. But I think it depends on the project is what I'm saying.
No, I totally hear you. And I feel like I have a lot of sort of fantasy and sci-fi concepts where I'm very interested in hearing what people have to input in terms of things they've seen which are similar or things that can inspire me further. But if it's something very connected to me, then of course there's a level of like, this is literally my story. I'm looking more for like, does it sound like it's coming off well, other than creative tips. So I think it just depends.
So some of the best work that I've ever been a part of has been work that was brought from other writers that I never would have imagined. Because of their perspective, they bring it in and go, I never saw it that way. That's really interesting.
Yeah, sure.
You can learn things about your own characters sometimes when someone else, is able to weigh in. I also think it's a healthy sign of ego when you actually are able to listen to others and not be not feel threatened. You can always say no.
Yeah, for sure. I think as people and as creatives, we have a bit of a reflexive take on like, oh, is that what you think about what I, you know what I mean?
We get defensive.
Yeah.
Yes.
A bit.
Yes.
But for all of this panel, what I've been trying to do for this event has been trying to be more hopeful because we've all had a lot of tribulations along the way. I wonder if there's anything in the way that you write or anything you can say for the writing process, a message of hope for the future and for how we all move forward as screenwriters and as creatives.
Message for the future, I echo the same thing, I think. I don't want to be a broken record, but the hope that I see is in the variety of storytellers that we have now. I think obviously there's a lot of press and a lot of publicity over the state of the business and the state of the world, and there's a lot of challenges, more so now than ever, to bring stories and to fund them and to distribute them. But I'm so encouraged by the variety, the diversity of different filmmakers across the world and the different stories that we're telling. You mentioned that you're developing a science fiction story. I don't think that was a common conversation 25, 30 years ago where writers of color were discussing
Sure,
science fiction on a wide basis. You know, now that's common. In addition to family dramas, in addition to coming of age stories, in addition to romance, in addition to horror, in addition to action, you know, these are all things that I think are now possible. Once the box has been opened, there's no going back. So I'm encouraged by that.
Absolutely. Well, again, wonderful message. We have a round of applause, please, for Aaron.